This story is inspired by the real case of Karina Saunders, 2011, Oklahoma, USA. Karina was just 19 when she vanished, and only days later, her body was found dismembered inside a suitcase behind a store. The brutality of this crime shocked an entire community, and to this day, many questions remain unanswered. October 8, 2011. The suburbs of Oklahoma City buzzed with everyday life. Malls were filled, cars rushed through intersections, and no one suspected that a horrifying story was quietly unfolding beneath their noses. Karina Saunders, a vibrant 19-year-old with striking green eyes and dreams far bigger than her small-town surroundings, had vanished without a trace. She was last seen outside a casino in Bethany, Oklahoma, laughing, talking, alive. And then, silence. Her family, particularly her cousin, sounded the alarm early. It wasn't like Karina to disappear. She had battled her own demons, addiction, bad relationships, but she always checked in. A week passed, then two. Flyers with her face covered gas stations, bus stops, and telephone poles. Social media lit up with hashtags, prayers, rumors. Her mother clung to hope, convinced her daughter would walk back through the front door any day now, but that door stayed shut. Then came October 13th. Behind an abandoned grocery store in Bethany, two men scavenging for scraps stumbled upon a suitcase. It was oddly placed, not hidden, not exactly out in the open. Curiosity got the better of them. They opened it. What they found changed everything. Inside the suitcase were body parts, mutilated, dismembered, wrapped. The scene was too grotesque to comprehend. Police arrived quickly. Investigators worked the scene with surgical precision, cordoning off the area, taking photos, bagging evidence. It didn't take long to make the connection. The remains belonged to Karina Saunders. Dental records confirmed what her family feared most. But nothing could have prepared them, or anyone, for what came next. Karina hadn't just been murdered. She had been tortured, brutally. The autopsy revealed unimaginable cruelty. Authorities believed she had been restrained, beaten, even mutilated while still alive. Rumors swirled of a video, an alleged recording of the torture and execution of Karina, filmed to intimidate witnesses in the dark world of sex trafficking. The mention of that video spread like wildfire, though to this day, no such recording has ever surfaced publicly. The mere suggestion added a new layer of horror. This wasn't a random killing. This was a message. But from whom? Bethany PD was now under a microscope. Pressure mounted. The media went wild. Reporters dug into Karina's past, painting her as a troubled young woman, a party girl, a risk-taker. But her family pushed back. Karina was more than a headline. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, someone who had made mistakes. Yes, but someone who didn't deserve this. As the town grieved, investigators faced a maze of dead ends. No witnesses, no murder weapon, no surveillance. Just a suitcase filled with silence, and a community holding its breath for justice that refused to come. Karina Saunders had vanished. But what had really happened during those lost days between her disappearance and the discovery of her remains? Who had she met? Who had she trusted? And most importantly, who had betrayed her? In the shadows of Oklahoma, a terrifying story was only beginning. The news of Karina's death sent shockwaves through the community. Local TV stations played loops of the scene outside the abandoned grocery store. Helicopters hovered above, and the scent of media frenzy mixed with the scent of fear. But fear wasn't just felt by the public, it was felt by those who might have known something. People who had seen Karina in her final days started going quiet. Calls to detectives were often cryptic, fragmented, hesitant. One woman, an alleged witness, claimed she knew where Karina had been held. She said it was a house, a trap house, and that Karina wasn't alone in her suffering. This wasn't just a murder investigation anymore. It was unraveling into something much darker, a tangled network of drugs, sex trafficking, gang intimidation, and silence bought through fear. Investigators received anonymous tips suggesting that Karina had been targeted as an example. She was reportedly lured by people she thought were friends, then handed over to others involved in trafficking. Names began to surface: Kenny Richards, Francisco Gomez, Luis Ruiz. Each name, another door to knock on, another dead end. Witnesses would start to speak, then vanish. Others would give vague stories, then recant. It was a pattern that haunted the case from day one. Just when it seemed like police were getting close, everything slipped away again. One tip led them to a small home in Bethany where someone claimed Karina had been tortured. Detectives searched the property. Blood was found, some of it human, some not, but none of it matched Karina. No charges, no arrests, no answers. The person who made the tip disappeared. A pattern was beginning to form. Rumors were not just wild, they were precise. Karina was said to have been filmed during her torture. The video, many claimed, had been used to scare other girls trapped in trafficking rings. One woman described seeing the video on a burner phone passed between men like a trophy. But again, no copy was ever found. Just shadows of a horrific tale whispered in the alleys of Oklahoma. Karina's family became more vocal. Her mother, in particular, refused to let the case fade into obscurity. She spoke at vigils, on news segments, pleading for answers, for anyone to speak up. She believed the police were not doing enough. She believed people knew. And she wasn't wrong. Slowly, it became clear that Karina's death wasn't an isolated act of violence, but a symptom of something systemic. A hidden world where girls were treated like currency, where silence was survival, and where fear kept the truth buried. Meanwhile, law enforcement tried to piece together timelines. Karina had last been seen at a Taco Bell, then at a casino parking lot, then allegedly forced into a car against her will. Days passed, hours lost. Cell phone pings were scattered. Surveillance footage was poor. She had been moving, but not on her own, and whoever was with her was making sure she wouldn't be found alive. Every thread investigators pulled seemed to unravel. Too many leads, too few truths. Every corner they turned, a new ghost waited. Every door they opened, another slammed shut. This was more than a murder. This was a warning. And Karina Saunders was the message. By late October, the case of Karina Saunders had become a chilling symbol of everything that could go wrong in a small town with a big secret. Beneath the surface of Bethany, Oklahoma, behind the strip malls and quiet streets, there thrived an underworld no one wanted to admit existed. Drugs, trafficking, manipulation, and a growing sense that the people responsible for Karina's death were being protected by something bigger, something darker. The community began to fracture. Trust in the police was wavering. Theories flooded online forums. Was this a cartel operation, a cult, an underground trafficking ring? Everyone had a theory. No one had answers. In the background, a name kept returning like a shadow in the dark: Kenny Richards. A known figure in the local criminal world, he wasn't just someone with a record, he was someone people feared. Multiple witnesses claimed Kenny had lured Karina into a trap, that he was present during her torture. Some even said he orchestrated it. But there was a problem. None of the statements stuck. Witnesses contradicted each other. Some were high when they spoke. Others vanished before they could testify. And every time police thought they had enough to charge someone, the foundation collapsed. A prosecutor once described it as trying to hold smoke in your hands. Then came a major break, or so it seemed. A young woman came forward claiming to have seen it all. She said she was forced to watch Karina's torture in a room filled with men, drugs, and fear. She described the house, the people, even the suitcase. Her story was horrifying and deeply detailed. Investigators believed her at first. They raided homes, pulled records, compared evidence. But within weeks, the woman recanted, said she made it up, claimed it was all a lie to get back at someone. The case shattered again. Hope turned to dust. Despite the chaos, Karina's family refused to give up. Her mother, Jamie, transformed her grief into action. She became a face of advocacy, organizing marches, speaking out about human trafficking in Oklahoma. Her voice was raw, unfiltered, driven by pain. She called out the justice system, the delays, the failure to protect girls like her daughter. In her eyes, Karina wasn't just murdered, she was abandoned by a system that was supposed to protect her. And that system seemed to be more focused on damage control than finding the truth. Meanwhile, the streets whispered louder. Names shifted. New suspects emerged. Old ones returned. A man named Luis Ruiz was arrested, then released. Another, Francisco Gomez, was briefly held, then let go. Each time, the family felt the same sting of false hope. How could a case so brutal, so high profile, remain unsolved? Why did so many people know pieces of the story, but none were willing to connect the dots? Bethany, once a town that clung to the image of small-town safety, now bore a scar that couldn't be covered. The murder of Karina Saunders wasn't just a crime, it was a rupture, a glimpse into the horrors lurking just beneath the surface, and the more investigators tried to close the case, the more it resisted, like a wound that refused to heal, like a ghost that wouldn't rest. The longer the case dragged on, the more surreal it became. What began as a brutal homicide had spiraled into a true crime labyrinth of missteps, false leads, and broken promises. In early 2012, a grand jury was convened, a rare and serious step for a murder case like this. Prosecutors were desperate to bring formal charges to show the community that justice was not just a word painted on courthouse walls. Behind closed doors, witnesses testified under oath. Some were calm, others trembled. A few refused to speak entirely. The secrecy of the grand jury proceedings gave the illusion of progress. But outside the courthouse, the truth remained buried. 2 suspects were finally arrested, Luis Ruiz and Jimmy Massey. Their names had hovered in the background of the investigation for months, always connected to Karina's final days through whispers, rumors, and secondhand stories. Police said Massey had confessed, partially, that he admitted to kidnapping Karina, that he knew what happened in the house where she was last seen. The community held its breath. Was this it? Was justice finally on the horizon? But just as quickly as the arrests came, the case began to crumble. Again, Massey's confession, investigators revealed, was vague and riddled with inconsistencies. It contradicted known facts. He recanted parts of it. His lawyer argued he was coerced. Ruiz, meanwhile, denied everything. Prosecutors tried to link them to the crime scene, to the suitcase, but physical evidence was thin. No DNA, no video, just a string of testimonies, many from people struggling with addiction, fear, or criminal charges of their own. The prosecution's foundation wasn't just weak, it was sinking. In a dramatic turn, all charges against both men were dropped in 2013. The district attorney cited lack of evidence and unreliable witnesses. The courtroom gasped. Karina's mother collapsed. Cameras captured every moment. For the family, it was more than just a legal loss. It was emotional devastation. They had been told there was a plan, that justice was close. Now, they were back at square one. A brutal murder, no suspects, no trial, no closure. The case became radioactive. Detectives were rotated out. Leads grew cold. Files were boxed up and archived. The public moved on, at least most of them. For those who knew Karina, for those who had seen the depths of this story, forgetting wasn't an option. Whispers returned to the idea of a snuff film, a secret network, a protected group that operated above the law. Every shadow looked suspicious. Every silence felt planned. In time, the story of Karina Saunders stopped appearing on front pages. New tragedies took over the headlines. But her family, especially her mother, kept pushing. They launched public awareness campaigns. They demanded transparency from law enforcement. They built digital timelines and circulated photos of Karina in her last known hours. Their pain became public, their grief weaponized against silence. They refused to let her name vanish like so many others. But the deeper they pushed, the stranger things became. Tips continued to arrive, emails, phone calls, anonymous letters. Some credible, most not. One letter, sent in 2014, described in chilling detail a room with plastic on the walls, a girl begging for her life, and a man who laughed while filming. The handwriting was shaky. No return address, police investigated, nothing came of it. Just another page in a growing file of horrors with no end in sight. Karina's story had become a haunting echo, one that refused to fade. By 2015, 4 years had passed since Karina Saunders' dismembered body was discovered in that suitcase behind the grocery store. 4 long years filled with unanswered questions, false starts, and a gnawing silence that stretched across Bethany like a permanent fog. Yet despite the passage of time, the pain remained raw. For Jamie, Karina's mother, the wound had never closed. She continued to speak at local events, using every platform to keep her daughter's name alive. Karina didn't disappear, she would say. She was taken, she was tortured, and she was thrown away like trash, and they think we'll forget. But I won't. Behind her public bravery, however, the trauma ran deep. Jamie suffered multiple breakdowns. She lost her job, isolated herself from friends, and spent hours digging through police reports, building timelines, connecting names on a whiteboard in her kitchen like a detective in her own thriller. Her life had become the investigation. She no longer trusted the system to deliver justice, so she tried to chase it herself. But Karina's story wasn't just haunting one family. It had become a mythic nightmare for the entire state. In Oklahoma, where the opioid crisis had decimated communities and human trafficking cases had risen exponentially, Karina became a dark symbol. Politicians spoke her name during debates. News specials revisited her case every October, yet still nothing. No arrests, no new evidence. Just theories wrapped in fear. In 2016, whispers of a cold case task force began circulating. Detectives, some new, some old, were said to be quietly re-reviewing the Saunders file. Interviews were revisited, evidence retested, surveillance footage reanalyzed with newer technology. A ray of hope broke through the gloom. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, OSBI, officially took over the case. It was a major move. The OSBI had resources the local department didn't. They brought forensic psychologists, criminal profilers, advanced DNA labs. They re-interviewed old witnesses, tracked down new ones, and reconstructed Karina's final movements minute by minute. Detectives flew out of state to speak with informants who had fled Bethany. There was a renewed sense of urgency, a belief that the case was not dead, but sleeping. One OSB agent, speaking off the record, described the case as the most twisted, frustrating investigation I've ever touched. He hinted that multiple people had been involved in Karina's death, but that none would speak unless they were absolutely sure they were safe. There's a code, he said, not just fear of jail, fear of what happens if you talk. Still, there were signs of progress. A new witness emerged, this one credible, protected, and ready to talk. He described a party house, a woman being tied up, a man bragging about making her scream for the camera. He named names. He pointed to a location, an old shed behind a rental property. Investigators descended on it with forensic tools. For a moment, hearts raced. Was this it? But the shed had been torn down 2 years earlier. The timeline didn't match. Whatever evidence once existed had been bulldozed and paved over. Just like that, another door closed. And still, the suitcase. That cursed suitcase. Torn, stained, unforgettable. The single object that carried more weight than anything else in the case? What did it mean? Was it chosen on purpose, left out intentionally, to send a message? Or was it just the cruel convenience of killers who knew the art of intimidation better than the art of disappearing? In a case filled with whispers, the suitcase screamed the loudest. The case of Karina Saunders had become a specter, haunting the halls of law enforcement, creeping through late-night talk shows, and living rent-free in the minds of anyone who had ever heard her name. But for all the media attention and sporadic bursts of investigative energy, justice remained elusive. Every few months, a headline would resurface, "New break in Saunders' case? Investigators revisit key witness." But they all ended the same way. No arrests, no charges, no closure. It was as if the truth was being swallowed whole by something darker than incompetence, something intentional, something sinister. In 2017, a confidential informant came forward under heavy protection. His story shook investigators to the core. He described not just one, but multiple girls trafficked through Oklahoma, some of them minors, many of them lured with drugs and promises of escape. He claimed Karina wasn't the first victim, but she was the first to fight back. He said she refused to be compliant, that she screamed, fought, threatened to go to the police. And that's when everything changed. According to the informant, Karina's death was meant to be an example, not just a killing, a warning. He described a house in rural Oklahoma where lessons were taught, where disobedient girls were made to suffer in front of others. He said Karina's torture was filmed not just to terrify the witnesses, but to sell. That deep in the darkest corners of the internet, videos like hers were traded like currency. This wasn't just a story about one murder, it was a window into a market of cruelty. But once again, no video ever surfaced. The informant disappeared weeks after giving his statement. His location remains unknown. Law enforcement never confirmed or denied the existence of any footage. Some investigators believed the story, others dismissed it as fantasy. But the possibility alone was enough to shift the tone of the case. Karina Saunders wasn't just a victim of a brutal killing. She may have been the target of a fully orchestrated display of terror, a symbol, a message. As time moved on, the public began to forget. New tragedies filled the headlines: school shootings, political scandals, natural disasters. But Karina's mother did not forget. Jamie turned her grief into obsession. She documented every new rumor, every new face that appeared in the periphery of the case. She created a digital map, pinning names, addresses, dates. Her home became a war room. She would often wake in the middle of the night, certain she had made a new connection, scrambling to scribble it down. Her relationship with police grew strained. She accused them of negligence, of turning a blind eye. Some officers stopped returning her calls. Others called her emotional. But Jamie didn't care. In her eyes, they had failed, and the silence she received only made her louder. Behind closed doors, some detectives agreed with her. There were whispers that certain names in the case were untouchable, that some suspects had protection, either through connections or fear. A few officers retired early, others requested transfers. The Karina Saunders file grew heavier, thicker, messier. A case no one wanted, but no one could forget. And then, one day, a piece of evidence resurfaced. A shoelace. It had been logged early in the case, pulled from the scene near the suitcase. But now, new DNA technology allowed a deeper analysis. The results came back. Male DNA, not from anyone previously tested. It was a new profile, a new name, and possibly the first real thread in years. But would it be enough to pull the rest of the truth free? The discovery of the unknown male DNA on the shoelace reignited hope, both for investigators and for Karina's family. After years of chasing shadows, false testimonies, and vanishing suspects, they finally had something tangible. a scientific lead, a thread that couldn't lie, couldn't recant, couldn't disappear. The DNA was submitted into CODIS, the National DNA Database. Weeks passed. Then came a hit, partial, but promising. It belonged to someone with a criminal record in another state, a drifter, a name barely mentioned in the original investigation, Jared Lee Bradford. Jared wasn't a central figure in Bethany. He wasn't on the early suspect lists, but he had been in Oklahoma in 2011. Arrest records showed him picked up on a drug charge just weeks before Karina vanished, released shortly after. Then, nothing. He left the state and hadn't returned. A background check painted a disturbing picture. Assault charges, restraining orders, petty theft, and an outstanding warrant in Texas for failure to appear. But what stood out most wasn't what was on paper. It was who he knew. Phone records showed Jared had been in contact with both Luis Ruiz and Kenny Richards in the weeks leading up to Karina's death. Burner phones, short calls, encrypted messages. It painted a picture of someone involved, but careful, someone on the edge of the scene, yet deeply connected. Investigators tracked him down in Nevada, homeless, addicted. He was arrested quietly, held on an unrelated charge, and then questioned. The interrogation lasted 8 hours. Jared denied knowing Karina Saunders, denied ever being in Bethany, denied owning the shoelace, but the DNA didn't lie. When confronted, he broke down, then asked for a lawyer. The interview ended. Detectives left frustrated but energized. They had a name, a connection, a presence. But would it be enough to bring charges? The DA's office was cautious. They had been burned before. They needed more. Meanwhile, Jamie clung to the news like a lifeline. She watched every update obsessively, posted daily on social media. For the first time in years, people were talking about Karina again, not just in whispers or on Reddit threads, but in newsrooms, on podcasts, on television. The case was alive. But then, the backlash. Some activists argued that authorities were chasing a scapegoat, that Jared, a homeless addict, was the perfect fall guy for a case too messy to solve properly. Online debates raged. Was this justice or another misdirection? The pressure was immense. The OSBI doubled down, bringing in forensic analysts to cross-reference evidence from the suitcase with Jared's known movements. They re-interviewed old witnesses, this time under immunity agreements. A new witness came forward saying she remembered seeing Jared at a party Karina attended days before she vanished. She described him as quiet, twitchy, like he was watching everything. But her memory was hazy. Drugs had blurred the details. It wasn't enough. Still, the puzzle pieces were starting to shift. Jared wasn't the center of the storm, but he was part of it. Behind the scenes, a grand jury was quietly reconvened. The shoelace was presented. The DNA match. The phone records. The circumstantial trail that led straight into the heart of Bethany's darkest secret. Jurors listened, reviewed, debated. But the case, like always, hovered on a razor's edge. One wrong move, and it would collapse. One brave witness, and it could break wide open. The grand jury deliberated for weeks. Behind closed doors, they weighed evidence that had taken over a decade to assemble. Each file, each photo, each chilling testimony, another stitch in a patchwork of horror. Yet, even with the shoelace DNA, the phone records, and the witness who remembered Jared Lee Bradford from the party, there remained a looming question. Would it be enough? Prosecutors feared the same outcome as before. Charges dropped, public outrage reignited, and Karina's name dragged once again through the uncertainty of a failed system. But this time, they were determined to move carefully. No press conferences, no victory laps, just silence and strategy. Then, on a quiet morning in late 2019, nearly 8 years after Karina Saunders' murder, the decision came down. No indictment. The evidence was deemed insufficient for prosecution. The jury cited lack of physical links to the murder site, gaps in timeline reconstruction, and unreliable testimony. The shoelace, while damning, was not enough to convict without context. Jared Bradford was released. Again. And with that, the fragile structure collapsed once more. Jamie Saunders received the call she feared but expected. Her scream could be heard through the walls. It was the sound of a mother falling into a void for the second time. There were no cameras this time, no crowds, just silence, and a growing bitterness that had been quietly boiling inside her since 2011. Public attention quickly faded. The world, so ready to cling to horror for entertainment, now turned its gaze elsewhere. The vanished girl in the suitcase became another cold case buried beneath newer tragedies. But in Bethany, her story never ended. In the alley behind the old grocery store, where her remains were found, someone continued to leave flowers. A single red rose every year on October 13th. No one ever saw who left them. The suitcase, once evidence now locked away in a police archive, remains the only object that truly spoke. A grotesque container of brutality, it became a symbol, a reminder that Karina's murder wasn't just a single act of evil, but part of a chain. One of many girls lost to silence, to drugs, to trafficking, to apathy. The case is still open. Technically. The OSBI occasionally revisits the file. New technology might one day reveal more. A forgotten video, a confession from a dying man, a piece of clothing retested. But for now, it rests in a drawer, marked with her name, her date of death, and a single word in red ink: unsolved. Jamie still fights. She's been to Washington, spoken at conferences on trafficking, turned her sorrow into advocacy. But in her heart, she knows the truth. Justice doesn't always arrive. Closure is a myth. Some monsters walk free, and some stories end not with resolution, but with an open wound. Karina Saunders was more than a victim, more than a case number, more than a headline. She was a teenager with dreams, a girl with laughter in her voice, a soul stolen, brutalized, and discarded. And though the world moved on, her mother did not. Because when your daughter vanishes into a suitcase, into a system that won't protect her, into a story too dark for most to face, you don't stop. You burn, and you wait for someone someday to finally speak, to finally break the silence, to finally finish the story.